With great power, of owning the film rights to Spider-Man, must also come great responsibility, of making a faithful adaptation. But getting a proper movie made took decades. The friendly neighborhood webhead dodged musicals, low-budget schlock, studio mergers, company bankruptcies, He-Man, and so many lawsuits before director Sam Raimi came to the rescue. Even then, the production dealt with drama and tragedy unlike any other shit show. Created in 1962 by, well, either Stan Lee, Joe Simon, Jack Kirby, and most likely, Steve Ditko. It really depends on who you believe. Spider-Man instantly emerged as one of Marvel Comics' most beloved characters. Beyond his spectacular wall-crawling superpowers and amazing handmade web shooters, Peter Parker's struggles with money, relationships, adolescence, and his own insecurities also made him the ultimate relatable superhero. The sensational sales of the comic surprised Marvel, and Stan Lee made it his mission in life to put the web-slinger in every corner of the world, from toys to television. Like the mostly successful 1967 animated series that gave us not only countless memes, but his undying theme song. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. And his 1974 live-action debut in the children's program The Electric Company, with a not-so-memorable theme song.
Spider-Man, where are you coming from, Spider-Man? Nobody knows who you are.
Spidey was rapidly becoming a cultural icon, but Stan Lee wanted to see him on the silver screen. The earliest known attempts to make a Spider-Man movie started in the 1970s. The producer of the '67 cartoon pitched a musical fantasy picture starring Mick Jagger or Elton John as the web singer. Lee tried selling a big-budget spectacle with Henry Winkler as the star, and then there was the efforts of a rock promoter whose deal with Marvel only produced the rock and roll audio adventure, The Amazing Spider-Man From Beyond the Grave, a rock comic? A word never used before or since. But it includes this banger. In 1977, the widely panned Amazing Spider-Man television series debuted on CBS. The feature-length pilot technically holds the distinction of being the first Spidey film, as it was released outside of the United States as a film. This was followed by Spider-Man Strikes Back and The Dragon's Challenge, where multiple episodes were stitched together to make movies for international audiences. Outside Peter Parker, Aunt May, and newsman J. Jonah Jameson, the show has no other characters or plots from the comics. But in terms of faithfulness, it was far closer than the other live-action TV series, Supaidāman. Marvel licensed the hero to the Toei Company in 1978, giving them free reign to make the brand popular in Japan. Which is why the show has virtually nothing to do with the comic, with not Peter Parker bestowed with powers by an alien from the planet Spider, granting him the ability to operate Leopardon, a 200-foot mech, the precursor to Toei's Super Sentai franchise.
They join forces like the Power Rangers. You're thinking of Voltron. Who? Voltron, you're thinking of Voltron.
One episode was released exclusively as a 24-minute film, therefore making it an official Spider-Man movie as well. Back in Hollywood, the first inklings of a true Spidey adaptation came in 1982, with a joint venture between Orion Pictures and Roger Corman, the prolific filmmaker of countless cheap exploitation films. Stan Lee provided a treatment himself that was obviously faithful with all the key hallmarks. College-aged Parker, a radioactive spider, mechanical web shooters, Uncle Ben's murder, Mary Jane the love interest, the villain Dr. Octopus, and J. Jonah Jameson, the character Lee wanted to play. It ends with a showdown on top of the UN building. And since it was the 80s, he also stops a nuclear war with Russia. As expected, this was far beyond what Corman would finance. But as they argued over the budget and the deadline to make the movie drew closer, Orion either didn't bother or just plain forgot to pay the license renewal. So the rights returned to Marvel. The comic book giant put the webhead up for auction in 1985, and the highest bidder got it for a steal.
He must have given up, thrown in the towel, abandoned his sad little masquerade.
For a measly $225,000, the rights went to cousins Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus of Cannon Films. In the 1980s, Cannon Films invaded theaters with their B-movie low-grade schlock, movies made on shoestring budgets that guaranteed guns, gore, dancing, nudity, and sometimes all of the above. Wait, that sounded awfully familiar. Watch this for more on that. Cannon was known for their massive output of films, around 30 per year, with only a few being breakout hits, and even fewer that could be considered good.
Cannon is the only company who loves cinema. It starts with Menahem and myself. We don't have other hobbies. Cinema is our life.
We are movie lovers. It's a love story. It's a very big love story between us and the cinema. And we do not play tennis. Look at me. I don't, I'm sorry. But I make movies.
All of this gave them the unearned confidence of competing with major movie studios. And Golan, the creative force behind the company, went on a spending spree, buying up as much recognizable IP as he could find, from Barbie and Masters of the Universe to Superman, Captain America, and of course, Spider-Man. Golan had no frame of reference for the wall crawler, assuming he was a horror creature in the vein of the Wolfman, and commissioned a screenplay thinking as much. Cannon's first attempt was by Poltergeist and Life Force director Tobey Hooper and written by the Outer Limits creator Leslie Stevens. It followed a man named Peter Parker who rebels against the mad scientist that transformed him into an 8-armed spider mutant.
Guy with 8 hands. Sounds hot.
Stan Lee was appalled by the idea and pleaded with Golan to reconsider, to go back to the formula he created.
Back to formula?
Lee suggested 2 writers, Ted Newsom and John Brancato. Lee previously hired them to write a Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos script that was shopped around studios to demonstrate the potential of Marvel properties. Following an outline by Lee, Newsom and Brancato's respectful Spidey script embraced all the key elements of the comic. But in order to streamline the plot, the lab experiment gone awry that turns Dr. Otto Octavius into the villain is also the same that creates the radioactive spider. This screenplay was exactly what Lee and Marvel wanted, and would remain the blueprint for every revision under Menahem Golan going forward. Meanwhile, at the Cannon offices, director Joseph Zito ran into Golan. Zito had heard they were prepping a Spidey film and asked to be given the project, not knowing that Tobey Hooper already had the seat. Thanks to the back-to-back successes of Missing in Action and Invasion USA, Cannon considered Zito their golden boy and told him they'd let him know in 24 hours.
I had no idea that I was asking for another director's film. I would never, ever, ever have done that. The story that I heard, Yoram Globus went out, talked him out of Spider-Man, and came back, and Menahem said to me the next day, "You have your Spider-Man." Never said this thing happened with Tobey. So I had no knowledge that Tobey was at anything to do with this at any point until years later.
When Zito got to work, he immediately clashed with Newsom and Brancato. He felt their script was faithful to a fault, that it assumed audiences already had a firm grasp of Spider-Man, when in reality the character was not well known to the general public. After not seeing eye to eye, Zito hired a new writer to make some adjustments, Barney Cohen, writer of Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, directed by Zito. Cohen's job was to simplify the plot, add more action, and give more screen time to suited-up Parker. He finished his work, but Golan still didn't get the character. How could a superhero be unlucky in life?
Crap, mega crap. I'll give you $200 for all of them.
Golan did his own rewrite under his pseudonym Joseph Goldman, adding current events, dumbing down the dialogue, and turning Spider-Man into a vindictive anti-hero. Zito knew most of this could be amended by the time they were on set, and focused on everything else. Storyboarding sequences, employing Richard Edlund, an effects wizard behind Star Wars and Ghostbusters, to figure out the web swinging and robot arms, and dreaming up an A-list cast, like Tom Cruise as Peter Parker and Bob Hoskins as Doc Ock. Though no one would be officially cast. Knowing who they were dealing with, Newsom and Brancato wrote copious amounts of notes to explain how they could keep the budget down, and Zito determined it could be made with at least $20 million. Cannon agreed, and began their never-ending promotional campaign for a film that had yet to exist.
Spider-Man, the movie. A live-action spectacular directed by Joe Zito, based on the characters created by Stan Lee.
That's slander.
It is not. I resent that. Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
Then came 1987, Cannon's infamous, terrible, no good, very bad year. Superman 4 was a disaster as the budget was slashed in half, very obviously, in order to complete Masters of the Universe so they wouldn't be sued by Mattel, and paying Sylvester Stallone $12 million for an arm wrestling movie wasn't exactly prudent behavior. Between these 3 box office bombs, among others, settling debts by selling their theater chains, and being investigated for fraud by the US government, Cannon was losing money hand over fist.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
For Spider-Man, each time Zito met with Golan and Globus, his budget got smaller and smaller.
They cut down Spider-Man's budget from about $20 million, which is pretty healthy, down to about $7 million. And after having put a year or year and a half of his life in it, Joe Zito just threw up his hands. I can't make that picture for $7 million.
Cannon made a bold pivot and figured they could squish 2 spiders with 1 foot. They hired Albert Pyun to rewrite and direct Spider-Man and a sequel to Masters of the Universe. With a combined budget of $10 million, the idea was to film them simultaneously. Shoot 2 weeks with a pre-bitten Peter Parker, swing over to Masters 2, make the whole movie, giving the actor cast as Parker time to bulk up, then finish Spider-Man. 2 weeks before filming, Cannon's checks to license both properties bounced, according to Pyun, and subsequently neither film would be allowed to go in front of cameras.
Mr. Jameson, this is a page 6 problem.
We have a page 1 problem. Shut up.
Having spent over $2 million already on costumes and sets for the projects, Pyun was ordered to repurpose all of it for something, anything. Pyun and his friend Don Michael Paul spent a weekend outlining a completely different film, and instead shot Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Cannon, at a loss, needed to make something soon to keep the rights, and instructed future writers to aim for under $5 million and create an original villain, because they were uncertain if they actually had the rights to any of the Webhead's rogues gallery. Pyun and Paul went with a scientist-turned-vampire bat-human hybrid called Night Ghoul, who was definitely not Michael Morbius, and a darker, more violent take on the movie. Then Ethan Wiley's rewrite had a paraplegic doctor who turns into a human scorpion, who is definitely not Matt Gargan. It didn't matter, as Cannon was on the verge of bankruptcy and was bought out by Pathé Communications in 1988. The same company that would merge with MGM 2 years later. Remember this? It's important. Golan and Globus kept their positions, however a few months later it was determined that Golan was a liability and was pushed out. In his severance package, he took the Cannon-owned production company 21st Century Film Corporation, as well as the rights to Spider-Man and Captain America.
Can I give you some advice? You gotta get better at this part of the job.
At this point, Stan Lee was climbing up the wall. The Spider-Man movie has been the longest ongoing disaster you have ever heard of. Cannon has had 10 scripts done already, each one worse than the one before. Every year you'll read in the trades, "Coming soon, Spider-Man, don't miss it." Miss it, please, until we get a good script.
It's all my fault. I drove Spider-Man away.
In 1989, somehow Golan used his silver tongue to renegotiate his agreement with Marvel, paying them $450,000 probably helped, and extended his production deadline to January of 1992. He then commissioned Albert Pyun to make Captain America, a film made, buried, and unceremoniously dumped on home video 2 years after completion, and hired Bill and Ted director Stephen Herrick and writer Frank LaLoggia to turn Spider-Man into an action comedy. They didn't last long, and Golan, after once again attempting a rewrite himself, was handed a treatment by Stan Lee directly. Golan totally disregarded it and brought in Neil Ruttenberg to do what would be the final rewrite of Newsom and Brancato's original script.
It's better. Cheaper too.
Ruttenberg found working on the film a frustrating affair. as Golan and his team kept pushing to make the movie more of a teen sex comedy with nudity and some, let's call it, pervy behavior.
Any better this morning? Any change?
Change? Yeah. Big change.
At least he was given a little more leeway, bringing Doc Ock back and a budget that could hit as high as $15 million.
But could you pay me in advance?
You serious?
Golan figured it was good enough and used it to entice studios at Cannes Film Festival in 1990. Golan squeezed out every penny he could get by piecemealing the rights to 3 much bigger production companies, in hopes they'd financially back his film. And in doing so, he set the stage for a tangled web of legal problems that would take a decade to unravel. He sold the TV rights to media conglomerate Viacom, home video to Columbia Pictures, owned by Sony, and Carolco Pictures took the theatrical rights. Carolco agreed to front $50 million to make the movie alongside 20th Century Film. They got the rights expressly at the behest of James Cameron, who was gearing up for the Carolco-produced Terminator 2. Cameron considered Cannon a low-budget piece of junk outfit, and 21st Century wasn't much better. And he wasn't going to stand there and wait for them to ruin it. He urged Carolco to rescue the rights from Golan.
I'm going to rectify certain inequities.
Cameron had been a die-hard fan since he was a kid, working out so he could run across rooftops, engineering his own web shooters.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
And he convinced Carolco that this was a billion-dollar franchise in the making. They paid him $3 million to write a completely new script, and a new agreement with Marvel was made, yet again, extending the production deadline to May 1996. After finishing T2, Cameron was contracted to make another film with 20th Century Fox, so Spidey had to wait. But just before he started shooting True Lies, he delivered an 80-page treatment, taking the script back to formula.
Back to formula.
His concept was a much grittier and morally gray take on the character. The often profane Peter Parker hunts Uncle Ben's killer as a capital V vigilante, becoming an actual menace to the city.
This could have gotten a lot worse. Now hold still.
Before truly embracing his hero side by the end. Essentially what the Andrew Garfield version was in 2012's divisive Amazing Spider-Man. Most notoriously, Cameron wanted the film to be an allegory for puberty at every level. From Parker being a peeping Tom while Mary Jane undresses, and the two of them having sex atop the Brooklyn Bridge.
Change? Yeah. Big change.
And Parker waking up covered in webbing, and his web shooters being an organic byproduct. This was a stark contrast to the comic, as Parker building his own web shooters was a reflection of his genius, but more importantly, that he chose to follow that path.
Whoa! That came out of you.
Yeah. You can't do that, huh?
No? How on earth does that even? Anyway, we're getting sidetracked.
Not that he needed it, but Cameron consulted with Stan Lee often to get his blessing on any literary diversion.
Join me. Imagine what we could accomplish together. What we could create.
And Lee couldn't be happier, calling Cameron the best man on earth to do the Spider-Man movie. Cameron spoke with Leonardo DiCaprio about donning the mask, but it never went further than that. And though rumors went straight to Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Doc Ock, he was never in the script. Instead, the superhero faced an Electro-like crime boss, with Sandman as his henchman. As Carolco drummed up publicity for their Spider-Man project, Golan grew jealous that the press focused on James Cameron's involvement, not his own. He then discovered that Cameron's contract stipulated that he had approval of every credit given on his films, and he didn't want Golan's name anywhere near this one.
Did you really think that I'd let that happen?
Alleging Carolco was pressuring him out of the film and withholding the money they owed him, Menahem Golan sued Carolco Pictures in 1993, seeking to void their contract but maintain his producer credit. Between the unparalleled success of Tim Burton's Batman and the mere fact James Cameron's involvement gave the project not only legitimacy, but prestige, something Golan would have never been able to achieve, the Spidey rights became a hot commodity. And like a fly stuck in a web, Golan's lawsuit triggered every predatory studio looking for an opportunity.
I want that wall-crawling arachnid prosecuted! I want him strung up by his web! I want Spider-Man!
Carolco countered that their deal contained an addendum stating that they could buy him out without keeping his credit. But they had no proof that this change was ever made. Perhaps feeling like they didn't already have enough going on, Carolco then sued both Sony and Viacom, aiming for full rights. Sony and Viacom countersued Carolco and threw 21st Century and Marvel into the suit as well. The legal tape got even worse when 21st Century declared bankruptcy in '94, with MGM buying their library of films and assets, such as any unproduced scripts of the webhead variety. Then, a year later, Carolco went under too. MGM also swept up their Spider-Man theatrical rights in the fire sale, with Carolco's portion and having already swallowed up previous agreements from 20th Century and Canon. MGM believed they held every contract since 1985 and were fully entitled to make Spider-Man. Claiming Golan inherited the rights from Canon, then selling them in pieces was fraudulent.
What are you, his lawyer? Get out of here. Let him sue me. Get rich like a normal person.
MGM joined the party by suing Golan, Carolco, Sony, Viacom, and Marvel. As the fights went on, James Cameron insisted Fox swing in and get the rights, but they wanted nothing to do with the messy legal battles that were unfolding.
But you can't do this to me.
You know how much I sacrificed?
Oh, and then in '96, Marvel Entertainment declared bankruptcy as well.
But that's not all, folks. Here's the real blockbuster. Brace yourselves, you might want to sit out.
Throughout Discovery, sifting through the multitude of contracts, Marvel was outed for having some truly terrible legal counsel, conflicting statements, ambiguous conditions, and one such deal, which was lost when the lawyer's computer crashed and they tried reconstructing it by memory, accidentally included clauses from their contract for the Captain America film. The most egregious issue, and the one at the heart of these cases, was Golan's rights renewal in '89, where the deadline for production was so poorly worded, it inadvertently granted Golan the rights and a producer credit for all time.
This case travels beyond these courtroom walls. The men you see are seeking to wield the power of gods, and that places us on the edge of a precipice.
Regardless, Marvel's continued stance was that each of these contracts were now null and void, as no movie was put into production, and the rights should return to them. What no one saw coming was a tertiary defendant that unknowingly got tangled up in this entire mess, who had an ace up their sleeve.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Thanks to some very complicated legal shenanigans, watch this for more on that. Sony owned the rights to only 2 Ian Fleming novels, Casino Royale and Thunderball. With them in hand, they announced their intentions of making their own Bond series without Eon Productions, the film company that made every official 007 movie since Dr. No with MGM. Bond was MGM's most valuable asset, and they literally couldn't afford the competition. So they sued Sony for copyright infringement, then renewed their deal with the Fleming estate as proof of their legal standing. The cash-strapped MGM was already 4 years in with this Spider-Man lawsuit and was staring down the barrel of another costly court case. The former was a long shot at best. The latter was easily winnable. In March of 1999, MGM sacrificed their claim to Spider-Man in order to save James Bond. Essentially trading the two properties, Sony paid MGM $5 million to squash their Bond tuxedo suit. Then MGM paid Sony $10 million for the rights to Casino Royale. A judge ruled in favor of Marvel, ending all other cases, and Spidey returned to Marvel, who then immediately sold him to Sony Pictures.
How did you just do that? I'm a really good lawyer.
During negotiations with Sony, Marvel offered their entire superhero catalog for $25 million, a bit shy of what Disney paid. Sony only saw value in the wall crawler and paid them $7 million. Under this agreement, Sony needed to have the film in active development in less than 4 years, in theaters in 2 after that, and to keep the license, they must produce a Spidey-related movie every 5 years and 9 months. This is the very reason Sony has been spitting out disasters like Morbius and Madame Web, as it continually extends their deadline between the true money-making marquee Spider-Man films. And they will never let go of this billion-dollar property. Why that amount of time? No idea, but it adds up to 69 months.
Nice.
As Marvel climbed out of bankruptcy, they also established Marvel Studios to be run by Avi Arad. Not the Marvel Studios you're probably thinking of. Okay, last plug, but watch this for more on that. Arad pitched these larger-than-life characters to anyone who would listen, knowing that the superhero boom was coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts.
Starting in 1998 with Blade, the average audience member had no idea the R-rated action horror was a comic adaptation. It doesn't bear the Marvel logo and has a single blink and you'll miss it credit of its origins. However, studio executives saw Blade as a test case that Marvel could carve out a decent buck. Soon after, X-Men in 2000 proved that the genre could tackle serious themes and be a beast at the box office. The comic book gold rush was officially on, thanks to Avi Arad. Much can be and has been said about Arad's years of, let's say, inconsistent quality, from the highs of the extremely popular Spider-Man and X-Men cartoons to the lows of Fantastic Four, Daredevil, and Ghost Rider. Yet without him, the Marvel brand wouldn't be widely known as it is today, for better or worse. In the case of Spider-Man, his one goal was the movie had to be faithful, and he stood his ground on multiple occasions to maintain that. And in order to do this, he leaned a lot on his second-in-command and ultimate comic book geek, Kevin Feige.
I watched and learned from a group of people that were trying to exceed expectations and trying to fulfill their own childhood dreams and the childhood dreams of fans of the characters.
Sony and Arad's first choice to direct was, James Cameron. But after Titanic, the highest grossing film of all time that awarded Cameron 3 Oscars, he was the king of the world and decided that anything he made going forward would be his own original ideas. They met with Ang Lee, Baz Luhrmann, M. Night Shyamalan, Robert Rodriguez, Roland Emmerich, and Tony Scott. Tim Burton said he was more of a DC guy. David Fincher was only interested if he got to kill off Gwen Stacy, naturally, then called Spidey's origin dumb. Chris Columbus was offered the job the day after landing Harry Potter. Then came Sam Raimi. Oddly enough, Arad had actually clocked Raimi years earlier. Not as a writer or director, but randomly playing a bit part in 1993's Indian Summer. One particular scene of physical comedy featuring only Raimi struck Arad as a very Peter Parker moment, and he was excited to finally meet the man. Despite Raimi having worked on dozens of his own, mostly critically acclaimed films, not to mention his collaborations with the Coen brothers, none of his work had grossed over $50 million. It made him a celebrated cult film director and the most unassuming choice to make Spider-Man. While the other filmmakers lit up detailing how they'd achieved the technical feats, Raimi simply described how much the character meant to him as a role model, emphasizing how Parker's failures carried as much weight as his heroics.
I just thought Sony Pictures would hire somebody with more of a track record for this type of bigger picture behind them. And all I did was explain to the executives what my love for the character was. And I told them how much I loved it and what aspects I loved about it. And I got a call back the next day saying I had the job.
It was only after Sony hired him that he even thought about the logistics of the web swinging.
I was terrified. I mean, how was I going to make these extraordinary movements of Spider-Man with all his grace and agility swinging through the canyons of Manhattan be as good as all the fans knew they should be?
In a discussion with legendary visual effects supervisor John Dykstra, Raimi imagined an elaborate rig that could swing between skyscrapers. Dykstra bluntly told him that could kill someone and convinced Raimi that he'd solve this problem with CGI before filming began. And in a way, having the movie stuck in development hell for so long, it ensured that when the wall crawler finally climbed onto the screen, the technology was there to meet him. Alongside Dykstra, Sony wanted to prove how serious they were about the project and put together a crew of other Academy Award winners, from cinematographer Don Burgess to costume designer James Acheson. And for additional good luck, they scored Danny Elfman, composer of Batman. But what about a headlining star for this potential franchise? From the start, Raimi said he'd only make the movie with Tobey Maguire. Sony didn't get it, and neither did Stan Lee. Sure, he'd proven himself a great actor in smaller art house pictures, but he wasn't the square-jawed action hero type. Sony tried like hell to convince Raimi otherwise, turning the casting process into a free-for-all of every young actor in Hollywood, from the heartthrobs like Colin Farrell and Jude Law, to the unconventional like Zach Braff and Jason Schwartzman. Wes Bentley turned it down, Heath Ledger wasn't interested, Freddie Prinze Jr. poisoned his chances by espousing more of his love of Venom, a character Raimi quite infamously doesn't like, and James Franco and Joe Manganiello's auditions yielded entirely different roles. Throughout, Raimi was persistent. After making Maguire do a screen test in a bodysuit to make up for his slender frame,
Yeah. Big change.
Sony finally realized that it was more important to cast the right Peter Parker versus the man in tights. Raimi was vindicated. Even with the legal troubles behind them and the spectacular crew at the forefront, Spider-Man's big debut was anything but easy. The release was delayed from November 2001 to May 2002 to avoid potential dual strikes by the actors and writer guilds, which the VFX teams very much welcomed. And speaking of the writing, those headaches didn't stop with Golan. Jurassic Park and Mission Impossible scribe David Koepp started with James Cameron's story, severely toning it down, and later replacing Electro with Doc Ock and the Green Goblin. After a handful of drafts, Con Air's Scott Rosenberg took over, taking Doc Ock out. Then Koepp came back for a bit, but it was two-time Oscar winner Alvin Sargent who completed the final touches. When production started, Ted Newsom noticed similarities in the shooting script to the one he wrote 17 years before. From the villain breaking bad when corporate suits shut down his research, to Parker discovering he no longer needs glasses. An idea not expressly stated in the comics. Backed by nearly every previous writer and 25 pages of notes, Newsom filed an arbitration with the Writers Guild. Sony hit back saying they chose not to acquire any drafts owned by MGM, and even if they did, those contracts were voided by bankruptcies and should not be considered. The Guild completely ignored Newsom's claim.
See you, chump.
Of course, there are the widely circulated clickbait stories, like Maguire being unable to breathe hanging upside down in the rain, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine cameo getting cut because Fox conveniently couldn't find his X-Men suit,
my super suit,
and that the lunch tray scene was difficult, but not 156 takes difficult as much as social media wants you to believe. And oh boy, were early internet trolls furious when it leaked that Raimi was keeping Cameron's idea of organic web shooters.
We felt it was a logical progression to let him also spin his own webs, and in that way keep him a complete human being that we could identify with, and it was inspired by James Cameron's treatment. I think it's a great choice to help alienate him, to make him feel cut off, and to really embrace the spirit of who Spider-Man is, this misunderstood hero who's an outcast, who's cursed with these powers.
Then there were the less reported hardships that grew from aggravating to devastating. The same day that Maguire's double broke his leg in a stunt gone wrong, 4 of the handmade Spider-Man suits were stolen by a security guard and took a year and a half to track down, one of which was found in Japan, alongside a stolen Batsuit missing since 1996. Macho Man Randy Savage insisted on doing his own stunts, then landed on his head, causing a debilitating lifelong injury. And crew member Tim Holcomb was killed when a modified forklift, illegally being used as a crane, was overloaded, tipped over, and fell on him. After Sony attempted to cover up their safety violations, they were fined a trivial $58,000. And the film doesn't even include a dedication to Holcomb. Then the unthinkable happened on September 11th. Sony was currently running a teaser trailer showing bank robbers fleeing in a helicopter, only for it to get stuck in a web hanging between the World Trade Center towers. Sony pulled it the next day, as well as a poster with the towers reflected in Spider-Man's eye. Any debate about putting the teaser into the actual movie was immediately abandoned, as Raimi didn't want to pull audiences back into the tragedy. Contrary to popular belief, the towers were not digitally edited out of the film. During the nationwide panic, the George Bush White House met with Hollywood studios, strongly suggesting they help in the war effort. Stopping just shy of calling it propaganda, they stressed that future projects include patriotic themes and images of us versus them. Dutifully going along, Sony had Raimi add the final shot of Spidey jumping on the flagpole and the moment of New Yorkers banding together to attack the Green Goblin.
Oh yeah, I got something for your ass! You mess with Spidey, you mess with New York! You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
On May 3rd, 2002, along came a Spider-Man to rival all comic book movies and blockbusters. Critics called it spectacularly fun with an astonishing level of heart. The campiness isn't for everyone, but Tobey Maguire's friendly neighborhood earnestness and Sam Raimi's animated yet effortless direction was undeniable. The film was the first ever to cross $100 million in its opening weekend, an amazing achievement once thought impossible, and almost enough to cover its $139 million budget. It ultimately webbed over $800 million worldwide. Adding home video, television rights, video games, and toy sales, the film spun up nearly $2 billion, outperforming even Sony's wildest predictions.
They love me.
For The City That Never Sleeps, Raimi was proud and humbled that his very New York movie, with its very New York hero, could help the city heal, or at the very least, provide the briefest of escapist entertainment. When it came to award season, it lost both sound and best visual effects at the Oscars, but it did win Best Kiss at the MTV Movie Awards. Then the 2004 sequel, Spider-Man 2, proved lightning could strike twice. An improvement on almost every level, it is widely considered one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. Sam Raimi and his team set out to make a faithful adaptation to a beloved superhero and ended up defining the genre for years to come. He also made Spider-Man 3.
Now take all this.
Ooh, my spider sense is tingling. If you know what I'm talking about.
So good.
It's hard to believe what's happening. The brutality of it. It's over.
Good riddance.
We don't really talk about this.